Oma Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So this prayer says that I'm born into ignorance. Oma Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya. But my spiritual master has opened my eyes with the instrument of knowledge. So, Chakshurun Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So I'm offering my respectful obeisances to my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And everyone coming into this world is in a precarious situation because the temporary body has a limited, we have only so many years to live. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that for one who is born, death is certain. And as Prabhupada describes it in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, everyone is stalked by the tigress of nescience, that around any corner I can be devoured. So even a little baby's thinking, is it safe? And is looking for security. And in many places in the scripture, it is described how this world is like an ocean tossing and turning. And it's not stable. It's not a place where we can actually find any permanent residence anywhere within this environment. And therefore, the Shastra calls to us to find higher ground, to find a place where you can actually have stability. Tamasima Jyotirgamai, that you should give up this unstable, dark material world and awaken to your original nature, spiritual nature. Find the spiritual world. And Krishna describes in the Gita that there is a stable place. Parastasmat tu bhavo nyo vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha yak saksarveshu bhuteshu nashyatsu navinashyati. That even as everything in this world is being churned and changed constantly, what I expected to be permanent ends up not being so, and I become disappointed bitterly. He says there is a different world that is of superior energy, superior place. And it's not subject to being manifested or not manifested the next minute. It's permanent. And so how to find that place is the topic of the Krishna consciousness movement. It's directing us, the teachings that have been brought to us by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and our Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, are meant to give us solace, protection, and the goal of life. Without a goal, one simply becomes morose and loiters or wanders in the material world from one phantasmagoria to the next. So with a goal of understanding that, first of all, this material world is not stable, it's not my home, and seeing that there is a process by which I can go back to my eternal home, one can then make the journey. And along the journey, there are a lot of signposts given by previous teachers who have traversed the path to reassure us that we're making progress. Nothing is as encouraging as progress and success. Nothing succeeds like success. And progress is very encouraging. And therefore, one must experience it for oneself. It's not meant to simply philosophize about, but it's meant to be put into action and experienced directly. And this Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam. Pratyaksha means you experience it for yourself. And similarly in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Yogendra says, Bhakti parishanu bhavo viraktir anyatra traisha trika ekakala. This means, he's talking about trika ekakala. There's three things that happen simultaneously when you surrender to Krishna, and then he gives an analogy. He says, Prapadya manasa yatasna tasus tushti pushti shudapayonagasam. So he compares it to eating food. That you're hungry, and you eat, and you know for yourself that you're getting nourishment, your hunger's going away, and you're becoming satisfied. Tushti, pushti. Pushti means nourishment, and tushti means satisfaction. In fact, when you're eating, you don't want anybody to bother you. At least I don't anyway. Because it's all absorbing. I mean, what more do you need than something to eat when you're hungry? And you feel satisfied. That's enough. And then the nourishment comes that if you are feeling cranky because your blood sugar was low, or whatever the reason, dissatisfied and hungry, as you eat, you feel that you're becoming nourished. Your strength is coming back. You feel again able to think clearly and so forth. And with every morsel you eat, then the hunger goes away. So these three things are compared to what happens when one embarks on the journey going back to the spiritual world. That Yogendra describes how there's bhakti. Bhakti means there's a natural sense of love that we have for God within our hearts. Every living entity has within their hearts. It's not restricted to any caste or creed or even species. Every living entity has that natural love for God within the heart. And as one takes to the process of devotional service, it begins to awaken. And one gets direct perception of God for oneself. Because we're part of God, we can actually perceive God. And then there's virakti, which means detachment from other things that aren't related to God. Naturally, there are, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, there are activities that are superior activities and inferior activities based on their association with the three modes of material nature, which is a very important aspect of the Bhagavad Gita to understand. Krishna describes in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita how everyone becomes bound up or illusioned by the three modes, these three modalities. Hare Krishna, Bobby. Nice to see you. Goodness, passion, and ignorance. You're here for our first Sunday feast program, you know. He's just come in from Toronto. Hare Krishna. So Krishna says, Tribhir gunamayer bhaver ebi sarvam idam jagat. Mohitam nabijanati mamebhya paramavyayam. That everyone in this world is bewildered by these three modalities, goodness, passion, and ignorance, roughly translated. And he said, but I'm not, I'm above them. And then he gives some description of the effects of the three modes of material nature. And we can observe those for ourselves. Very practical philosophy in the Bhagavad Gita, because you can hear what Krishna says, describing the three modes, and then you can observe it for yourself. For instance, the mode of passion, which is called Rajogun, is sometimes described as smoke. Smoke doesn't serve, it only disturbs. So Rajas is a mode in which one is always seeking something more. And I've seen this directly in the monkeys in Vrindavan. I've observed for myself. Now there's lots of monkeys in Vrindavan. Anyone seen them? Yeah. So there's different kinds of monkeys. They're the rhesus monkeys. They're the little brown monkeys. They seem to be quite agitated all the time. quite affected by this rajogun. And I noticed something very particular about them, and that is that although they like bananas, they can't enjoy them. And that's because while they're eating a banana, they're thinking one of two things. That either somebody's going to take it from me, and they're always looking around, and why didn't I get more? I saw one day when I was walking out of Radhakund at the last part of our parikram, means walking around. Krama means stepping, and pari means around. So parikrama, it's a kind of worship to walk around the holy places. And there's a hill in Vrindavan which is very sacred called Govardhan Hill. So we walk around that hill, and it's a very nice experience. And one day I was coming to the last stage of the parikrama, and I saw a woman who had, with good intention, bought a large bunch of bananas, planning on feeding them to the monkeys. One by one, I assumed. I think she assumed that. And as she was, with a benevolent heart, walking with this big bunch of bananas towards where the monkeys were loitering, she noticed that a big bull monkey was coming for her. And so, as a peace offering, or a gesture of goodwill, she held out a banana and said, "Here." And he said, "No, I want the whole thing." And he really meant business. He wasn't accepting one banana. He wanted the whole bag. He didn't even look at the one banana. He just had this total fixation on the whole bunch. And she let out a scream, and she let the whole bunch fall to the ground. And then I saw, as he was devouring them as quickly as he could, in one hand he was looking at them, and with the other hand he was sort of, getting ready to stave off anyone who would, try to get any of his bananas. And he was making a grunting noise at the same time, which was sort of a warning to anybody else, "Don't come near me." And I could see he was cramming him in his mouth as fast as he could, while all the time surveying the environment to see who was going to come and take the other bananas. And then I noticed that that's how they eat all the time. Whenever I watch them, they're always looking around to see that somebody else doesn't come, and it's almost as if they're cramming one banana in their mouth, and they're thinking, "Where's the rest of them?" And this is a symptom of the mode of passion. Too much is not enough. No matter how much you get, there's always something more that you could have gotten. There's no resting place. There's no satisfaction in that. And the mode of ignorance is seen in inebriation, intoxication. There used to be a show on television called Oprah Winfrey. And I saw a clip of a program that she did a long time ago about intoxication. And because it's interesting to study the subject of intoxication, because the Srimad Bhagavatam says that all living entities are attracted to intoxication. In fact, Prabhupada once mentioned that if an ant gets information that there's a grain of sugar at the top of a skyscraper building, he'll be there in 5 minutes. And she brought in, Oprah Winfrey I'm talking about, she brought in several people who were respectable, educated people, who were willing to subject themselves to this experiment. And she had to film them all talking in a room respectably and interacting with one another in an intelligent way. And then there was a controlled experiment where they consumed alcohol. And afterwards, of course, the camera filmed them in their interactions afterwards as well. And they were acting in an imbecile way. They were like imbeciles. What does that mean? Idiots. They're acting like idiots. And they didn't even know it. So afterwards, when the alcohol had gone out of their system again, she sat them down and showed them the before and after. and they were appalled. And they remembered thinking that they were saying very witty things when they were intoxicated, and that they were very suave and everything like that. And Prabhupada once said that when people, they take intoxication, they think, oh, I have gone to the heaven. But then they wake up somewhere in some compromised situation in a gutter. And the nature of intoxication and the nature of ignorance in general is that it takes away our ability to use our intellect properly. And we become absolutely foolish. And actually we do harm to ourselves. This is the mode of the ignorance. And we already described the mode of passion, and the mode of goodness means that there's illumination. You can, Krishna says in the Gita, see that there's light from all the different gates of the body emanating. And there's a sense of knowledge. See things in their proper perspective. Sattvam yad brahmadarshanam. There's a way in which one can see the difference between the body and the spirit. And one begins to appreciate the fact that they exist. In mode of passion, one's always searching to get something more, not satisfied with what one gets. But in the mode of goodness, there's a sense for satisfaction in the fact that I exist. The mode of sattva means that we realize our existence. That's a big deal, that we actually exist. And existence means it's permanent. That which is existing always existed and always will exist. Nasato vidite bhavo, na bhavo vidite sata, ubayor api drishton tas twanayos tattvadarshibhi. And I'd like to enter this verse into evidence for the pleasure of the court. This is from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna is describing the seers of the truth. These are people situated in this higher mode of nature, sattva gun. And the translation of the verse I just recited, those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. And here's the purport by Srila Prabhupada. There is no endurance of the changing body. That the body is changing every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern medical science. And thus growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of seers of the truth, both impersonalists and personalists. In the Vishnu Purana, 2.12.38, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all have self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyotishmi, Vishnur, Bhagavanani Vishnu. The words existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all seers of the truth. This is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. Removal of ignorance involves the re-establishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can understand the nature of the Supreme by thorough study of oneself, the difference between oneself and the Supreme being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. In the Vedanta Sutra, as well as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. Such emanations are experienced by superior and inferior natural sequences. The living entities belong to the superior nature as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter. Although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic is accepted as the Supreme, and the energy or nature is accepted as the subordinate. The living entities, therefore, are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant, or the teacher and the taught. Such clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. And to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches the Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. So this is a source of jubilation for someone who realizes that I don't belong to the material world and that I'm not the material body. I'm something different from the material body. Because along with the material body comes suffering. We suffer because of attachment to the material body. And when I realize that I actually have nothing to do with the material body and everything that goes with it, then there's a sudden sense of relief and joyousness that I actually exist independent of this changing material world. And Krishna describes this in the Gita. Brahma bhuta prasannatma na shochati na kankshati samak sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. The symptoms of one coming to this state of goodness, the modality of goodness, and then transcending it and being able to see his or her spiritual nature is called the Brahmabhuta, or the spiritual position. And prasannatma means there's joy. Natural joy comes out. There's a sort of spontaneous happiness that comes from knowing that one exists eternally. And then nashochati nakanchati means there's no hankering or lamentation, because hankering comes as a result of the thirst that the senses and the mind naturally have for temporary objects. This is called asat trishna. Trishna means taste. So when I have a taste for something that is non-permanent, then I experience unhappiness. Krishna says this in the Gita. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyantavanta konteya na te shuramate buddha. That the Buddha, or the intelligent person, doesn't take pleasure in the senses and their objects, that is, the material body and anything that the material body is attracted to. Because those things, those pleasures, have a beginning and an end. Adyantavanta. They start and then they finish. So why would one be interested in those? There's a superior happiness which continues forever. It doesn't stop. And Krishna says, if you get involved on that lower level, that is, you attach yourself through contemplation to the lower nature, then the result is dukkha, unhappiness. This is the source of our unhappiness, being attracted to to the lower nature. So this contemplation, Krishna says, leads to something unfavorable. So he says, Dhyayato vishayan pumsam sangasteshu bhajayate, sangat sanjayate kama, kamat kroto bijayate. When I contemplate the objects of the senses, I develop attachment for them. And contemplation means that, well, contemplation can take place when I think that there's something in it for me. That is, if I think that there's something I'll get out of the sense object, then I'll be very interested in it. But this is called ignorance, because I actually have nothing to do with those sense objects. They're separate from my real nature. But if I meditate on them, if I mistakenly think there's something in them for me, dhyayato vishayam pumsang sangasteshu bhajayate, I develop a sangha or a connection with them. I become connected with those things. And that's what we call I and my in this world. And those things that are mine in this world, I have to take responsibility for. They become troublesome for me because I've connected myself to them. So once I do that, once I develop the sangha for the material world, then there's a way in which I have to suffer. And dukkha is born, or unhappiness is born from that. So a person who has realized that his or her nature is beyond the senses and the body, naturally feels this relief and doesn't hanker for anything in this material world, has no more interest in it. And there's no more lamentation also because of being detached from the sense that I'm part of this world. Samak sarveshu bhuteshu means that the person in the spiritual position sees all living entities equally. And Krishna says in the Gita, 5th chapter, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavihastani Shuni Chaiva Shopakecha Paṇḍitāḥ sama-darśinaḥ. That a learned person is simply this: one who sees all living entities equally, because he or she sees that beyond the body there's a spiritual entity, a principle of a consciousness behind the body that's categorically different from the body. It's not material. It's categorically different. So the learned person relates to the spiritual soul rather than appreciating the body or not appreciating the body. It means you like it or you hate it based on your particular taste. But a spiritually advanced person sees everybody equally, whether they're in the body of a dog, an elephant, a homeless person, an elevated king. They see equally. Doesn't mean they treat them equally, because, for instance, an advanced spiritualist, although seeing a tiger as being a spirit soul, doesn't make the mistake, hopefully, of going over and petting him or something like that, because he knows that soul is conditioned in the body and doesn't have control over his or her senses. He might get his hand chopped off, or worse, from petting a tiger. And so this science of Krishna consciousness is very practical. It's meant for everyone in the world, but especially human beings, because a human being has full facility for cultivating this, and it is a cultivation. The great Acharya Rupa Goswami calls it anushilanam. Anushilanam means a favorable cultivation of this spiritual knowledge in such a way that you'll come to the highest platform called Uttama Bhakti, or full-blown love for God. And the cultivation is highly recommended. This is what we're teaching from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, how to cultivate this. It's very practical. Anyone in any situation, doesn't matter what it is, can employ the techniques of bhakti yoga and experience for themselves this clarity of thought and purpose, can feel themselves rise above the three modes of material nature, be able to control the lower self by the higher self, and will feel the satisfaction that comes from connecting to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is the purpose of our society, to present this so that everyone can take it. And that's why we've taken the trouble to establish this temple as well. That we have an environment in which everyone can come from the neighborhood or beyond to cultivate Krishna consciousness through a series of practices, bhakti yoga, which involve first and foremost hearing and then chanting. These are the first 2 out of 9 of the bhakti processes that one begins with and can experience the change. So it's called Shravanam, Kirtanam. Shravanam means hearing. And hearing's not that difficult unless the mind's very disturbed, because why would you come sit down and hear if your mind's dragging you somewhere else? You wouldn't be able to sit. But even when we sit, sometimes the mind wanders off when we try to hear. So although it's a passive kind of activity, it does require fixing the attention. And as one hears about Krishna, because the vibration itself comes from the spiritual world, it is received through material senses, which are made up of inferior matter. But because Krishna is in charge of all the energies in this world, he transforms the energies that we're employing in his service, that is hearing, into giving them the capability, the receptivity for actually experiencing spirit, something higher. He's controlling everything. So Bhagavatam says that Krishna is within the heart, and when he notices that you're trying to hear, that you're lending your ears to hear about him, that he assists you from within the heart. And he also helps to remove obstacles from within the heart. But what we have to do, the cultivation that I'm talking about, called anushilanam, or favorable cultivation, means I have to submit myself to the process of hearing, submissive hearing. God helps those who help themselves. And helping oneself means putting oneself in front of the spiritual vibration. You have to do at least that. Right? And then after that comes kirtanam, which means what you're speaking and what we say chanting. So after hearing something, then you'll speak about it. You can notice this in your daily life. If, for instance, you listen to the news and you hear some fantastical story about somebody just, lop somebody's head off, that's what will make the news, because if it bleeds, it leads. Or something, some horrific accident just happened somewhere, or some injustice was done, and you hear that, what's the natural thing? Then you're sitting with somebody and you say, did you hear what happened? I know when I was flying in from Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, I was just getting up from the seat on the airplane. People were already looking at at the news. The news flash comes in on the iPhone, and then I could just hear everyone talking about how there had been a big explosion somewhere in Boston, and people were killed and so forth. And I heard it before I even got off the plane. And it just happened while we were in the air, I believe. And so the vibration carries on. What you hear about, it goes in and then it comes back out again. So this is kirtanam. So there are different levels of kirtanam, of speaking, and they depend largely on what you're hearing. If you restrict the hearing process to certain topics, that's what you're going to talk about. And so in Krishna consciousness, Krishna anushilanam means to lend your ears to hearing about Krishna primarily, unless you have other business to conduct, and then you do it in an official way. But if you try this by focusing on hearing transcendental sound, then you'll notice that it's more natural for you to speak it also. And you'll have something to say about it because you'll have heard properly. And Krishna says in the Gita that all perfection can come from this, and that you can know everything about this world and the spiritual world just by hearing. 7th chapter, 1st verse. Maya sakta mana partha yogam yunjan marashaya ashamshayam samagramam yata gyasasi tatstrinu. Tatstrinu means just hear. All you have to do is hear. And if you hear, then he says, you'll know everything. Jnanam teham savigyanam idam bhaksham yasheshtaha. You'll know everything about this world and the subtleties of this world and what's beyond this world and so forth through the hearing process. Just like I could know in an instant what was going on in Boston, even though I couldn't see it, even though I was nowhere near Boston, in a second I could understand something's happened over there. And we're getting information by hearing. So the spiritual world exists, and this material world is just like a cloud over an insignificant part of the spiritual world. And to reconnect with the spiritual world, there's a cultivation, shravanam kirtanam. It's a positive cultivation. If you hear about the spiritual world, and you hear about Krishna, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then gradually that will awaken your knowledge of Krishna and your love for Krishna. And just by that remembrance and the dissipation of the coverings of ignorance, the three modes of material nature, which occurs through ingesting, so to speak, transcendental sound vibration, one comes to the perfect stage. And this was confirmed by Brahma, who is said to be the first living being in the universe and the most intelligent, who after studying the Vedas 3 times completely, understood that bhakti was the ultimate process to understand Krishna. And furthermore, after Brahma's personal interaction with Govinda, Krishna, in Vrindavan, in fact, he tried to test him. Brahma had, well, there's a chapter about this in the Bhagavatam called Brahma Vimohana Lila. Mohana means illusion, and Vimohana means very bewildered illusion. So Brahma experienced, when he tried to test Krishna, Gopal, that he became bewildered by his immense power and potency. And then he said, don't try to understand him with your intellect. Don't try to understand God by speculation. You don't have the power to do it. But if you submissively hear about him, stane stita shrutigatam tanuvan manobir, Brahma said this. He said, if you submissively hear from the situation you're in now, while you're in your situation, whatever it is, which you can't get out of anyway, you can't just quit. It doesn't work like that. But if you add this process of hearing, it's an active cultivation. Then he says, you will come to the topmost position of bhakti, which is that you'll develop your full-blown love for Krishna just by hearing. So much so that he says, although Krishna's name is Ajita, Ajita means one who can't be conquered. The person who develops this kind of love for Krishna conquers Krishna by love. And love comes from us. It's our own volition. It's our own free use of the independence that we have, the little independence that we have. When we use that, when we choose to cultivate Krishna consciousness by hearing, then Krishna reciprocates with us. And when we develop love, which is an act of free will, then the reciprocation becomes unlimited. Unlimited reciprocation. Krishna's name is Vancha-atita. Vancha-atita means one who reciprocates with you more than you can possibly imagine. Beyond what your expectation is. Whatever you thought, it's way beyond that, the way he reciprocates. So we're advocating this Krishna consciousness above all other types of consciousness, because by simply thinking of Krishna, and especially through hearing and chanting about him, one can fulfill one's heart's desire, one can control the senses, control the lower self by the higher self, and one can come to perfect knowledge and enjoy life from within, without any need for external stimulation. And Krishna says in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that a person who's engaged in Krishna consciousness can achieve this state because he or she is enjoying happiness within. He's not, although he may or she may interact with the external world, it's only official. There's no real interest in it. There's no real connection to it. And I gave the example last night that Krishna gives of a lotus flower that grows out of the mud and stays in the water, but it's never touched by the mud or the water. So a person who cultivates Krishna consciousness will feel this for him or herself by the cultivation. Hare Krishna. Om Tat Sat. Now let's hear if there are particular things you heard that you want to bring up, a particular point, or if you have questions. Akuranath Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, wonderful talk. I'm not sure how to ask this question or how to phrase it, but bear with me. But you were talking about how by contemplating the objects of the senses we get sangha, attachment for them, and it's just I, me, and mine, and we become attached to material things, to our own, family, country, things associated with our body. But my question is that if we're not attached to those things, like, won't we be heartless? Like you said, that paṇḍitāḥ sama-darśinaḥ. But I'm thinking that, if a mother doesn't love her child more than her next door neighbor's child, people will think she doesn't have much real emotion. Like she's not a loving person. She's indifferent to both of them, or something like that. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and let's examine based on the verse that I brought up earlier. Nasato vidite bhavo, napavo vidite sata, which means the seers of the truth have analyzed the nature of both the material energy and the spiritual energy, and said that there's a difference between the two. One is permanent and the other one isn't. So when I have attachment to others, and we'll use this example of, familial attachment based on the body, that can change at any time. In fact, Krishna mentions this in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam when he's speaking to Uddhava. He says that over a penny, brothers can become estranged for life. They have an argument over a penny or some slight thing. I saw this somewhat in one part of my family. There was an argument over some painting somebody had made, and who actually it was bequeathed to in the family, this painting that was done by a great-grandfather or something. Who gets it? And because of that, there was a split. And this happens all the time. People get married and they say, "I love you," and they give a ring saying this is forever. The circle represents, eternity, and so forth. But then it's broken. Later it's broken. And even in the best of circumstances, a mother's love for a child, and we saw during the big tsunami that took place, there were families. In fact, there was a newlywed couple there, and the woman was standing there, and her husband, on their honeymoon day, the day after their wedding, was swept away with everything else into the ocean, and she never saw him again. And so I'm saying that when I have a superficial idea of who I'm attached to, and I say superficial, you can test this, because when somebody dies, when we say they die, according to the Bhagavad Gita, nobody dies, but actually the soul moves out of the body. The spiritual principle moves out of the body somewhere else, and therefore the body's no longer animated. However, when somebody dies, people will say, he's dead. And of course, Yamaraj at one point tested this for the wives of Suyagya. Was that his name? Suyagya was a great king, and he had fought many battles. In the last battle, he lost. He fell down on the battlefield with his limbs smashed, and he had bitten his lip out of a sense of valor. And then after the battle cleared, his wives came and they gathered around him. They began to wail that he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. And Yamaraj, from his abode, heard this crying going on. And it was a bit obstructive in the sense that there were funeral procedures to take place in a timely fashion, and they were obstructing that. So Yamaraj showed up in the form of a 5-year-old boy and said, "Why are you crying?" And they said, "The king has died. He's gone." And the little boy said, "I think you're mistaken. He's not gone. He's right there." And they said, "No, little boy, you just don't understand. See, dead means dead, gone." And he said, "No, you don't understand. He's got the same eyes, the same ears, the same hands, everything's same. How can you say he's gone? He's right there." And they said, "Who are you, little boy?" And he said, "I'm Yamaraj. I've come to teach you something. And that is, you never saw the king. You're crying for somebody you never saw. Because the principle that you were attracted to, that you say is gone, is something that you weren't able to see with your eyes. Now you see only the body, and that's all you've ever seen. So from the point of view, from the superficial point of view, I may be interacting with people in a loving way. And this is natural because the soul is sentient, which means sensitive. Sensitive to what? To feelings, to love, and so forth. But if it's misplaced, in other words, if I have a sense that I'm loving the body, something that somebody's not, then that kind of love can be broken at any moment. Therefore, we say it's inferior. However, someone who has understood the science of the self, and the science of the self, by that I mean that there's a difference between energies, the material energy and the spiritual energy, and becomes such a person, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, becomes concerned about not only the material welfare, but more importantly, the spiritual welfare of people in general. And a person who's advanced spiritually tends to the material welfare of people based on the understanding that that person has a rare opportunity, human form of life. The body is God-given. It is, it's an important piece of property. It should be protected. And at the same time, that person realizes that there's an eternal soul within the body and knows how to minister to the soul. When I took my parents' ashes, I took my mother and my father's ashes to put in the Jamuna some years ago, 5 years ago or something. And when I came to Vrindavan, I ran into a god sister who had her mother's ashes. And so we commiserated and talked, and we even shared the boat when we went out into the Jamuna to put the ashes into the river. And she was telling me that in her family, she had other brothers and sisters, she had become dedicated to Krishna consciousness. And because of that, she spent what her parents thought and what many of her family members thought was an inordinate amount of time practicing Krishna consciousness and a disproportionate amount of time with loving affection for the mother and the father, so on. So there was a rift in the family, and her brother disowned her because he said at the time, "You weren't there for mom. You broke off and you got into this spiritual life, and you didn't really take care of the family as you should have." However, there was a change, and a change happened a couple months before the mother died. And this devotee, who had dedicated her life to Krishna consciousness, came and took care of her mother in her last couple months of her life. And the brother was not able to do that. In fact, he was squeamish around the whole scene of the mother leaving the world and things. And I've seen this oftentimes. Family members, right around the time of death, they don't want to be there. Just tell me when it's over. It's taboo to talk about death during life. You can't bring it up normally at a family gathering and get a lot of reception. Mostly it's about, did you see a movie? How was this? How was that? Blah, blah, blah. But if you say, I know, let's talk about death. Either it's inscrutable, or it's taken as inscrutable, or it's something that is taboo to speak about. Pardon?
Morbid.
Morbid, it's morbid. And people think that, this is fanatical talk, or, why do we have to talk about this now? Let's not worry about it. No one thinks about it. So this devotee who went to take care of her mother while she was dying knew exactly what to do, because she knew how to relate to her mother's soul, not just to her body, but also, more importantly, to her soul. And her mother had really took shelter of her. And the brother who had rejected her saw this in the last 2 months. And after the mother died, the brother approached this devotee, his sister, and said, now I understand. I was meant to take care of her during life. You were meant to take care of her during her death. And he said, none of us in the family were qualified to do it, but you qualified yourself by dedicating your life to this Krishna consciousness. And he made amends with his sister. So I bring this as evidence because there's a practical way in which those who have elevated their consciousness, although at some point it may look like they're not as involved in the material world or don't care about it, there's a higher principle that they tend to that ultimately is appreciated by everyone. And I also would say that those who are spiritually minded, they don't neglect the body or those ordinary common relationships in a fanatical way, but they realize that they're a part of regular social interaction, and in some cases they're even more expert, because when there's detachment, there's a slight sense of detachment. There's a way in which you can deal with all kinds of situations in a more reasonable way, with more perspective.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Comments or questions? Comments means reflections, one thing that you heard stuck in your mind that you can use. And if you're watching online, the number to text in is 650-245-7018. That's 650-245-7018. And operators are standing by to take your calls.
Can you repeat the last thing you just said?
That if you want to text in, 650-245-7018. Operators are standing by to take your call. In general, what I said was that we're not the physical body. We're something higher than that. We're spiritual. We're a spiritual soul within the body.
But then you said one more thing.
That a person who's achieved a spiritual standing through this cultivation can interact with both the material and the spiritual world. Whereas a person who hasn't cultivated spiritual knowledge and is able to control the senses and so forth, has a difficulty even dealing with the material world. That was the point of the example I gave. And so I can repeat her question. So talk about detachment giving you perspective? Oh, the last thing I said was that through detachment you get a perspective. When you're attached to something, you have a vested interest in it, and it's hard to see it objectively. That's why originally university professors were supposed to have tenure, because they can't be fired, so they can be a little detached in what they say and what the kind of research they do and so forth. Right? Because if they are, what's the word I'm looking for? Interesanto?
They have interest, which is like a conflict of interest.
If there's a conflict of interest, oftentimes kings in bygone ages used to commission artists to write things. This is how artists survived. Back in the old days, is some king would say, I want you to write something. And of course, when they would write, they would be very careful to portray the king in a good light. Because otherwise, not only wouldn't they get paid, they might get killed. So, this kind of conflict of interest is, based on attachment. And therefore, it's very difficult to have a broad perspective.
Is that you quoted the verse Tribhir Gunamayar Bhavayar Ebik Sarvamidang Jagat Mohitang Nabhijanati, that people can't see Krishna, who's above the modes, because they're bewildered by those modes because of their association with modes of material nature.
Yeah, thank you. Two more reflections. Yes.
Okay, question. This is a question. You said that the seeing everybody equally and treating everybody equally is different. Can you please explain?
Say again.
Seeing everybody
Settle down.
equal and treating everybody is equal is different. So what does it mean? You gave an example that of tiger.
Seeing equally but treating them differently. I get an example with the tiger. So you may see and appreciate that the tiger is a living entity who is spiritual soul, who has assumed that body because of past karma. Got a tiger's body. And so you may appreciate that's part and parcel of God, but it's not like you're going to go over and pet the tiger. Because he is conditioned to jump on mammals and eat them. And you would consider that fact when dealing with another living entity. Although seeing equally, the way you interact with him or her would be different.
So Prabhuji,
So there's a practical side to life, and then there's an ultimate vision. These, in Shastra, it's called Vyavaharika and Paramartika. So the Vyavaharika part of our life means that you're already in the ocean. You're being churned, and you have certain obligations. Just like I heard this morning, Prabhupada was giving this example. He said, suppose in this lifetime you were very dedicated to developing some kind of industry, and you became a big industrialist. And then all of a sudden you discovered Krishna consciousness. He said, giving it all up suddenly would be impossible. But there's a way in which to stay in that situation and at the same time cultivate Krishna consciousness that Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita. So you would be acting on two levels, one for your ultimate interest and one doing what you're obliged to do according to your past karma. Gandharvika?
So Prabhuji, one simple point, it has always been difficult for me to understand, but it really dawned on me today is, in this world, like if we say water, 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 the thirst is not quenched or the hunger is not satisfied.
That's for sure.
But the point that you said, like how simply by hearing one can get love of Godhead and all perfection comes from that. And how you scientifically explain that when we receive the spiritual knowledge through hearing and we observe it through material senses, then the trick is Krishna within the heart does all the magic so that we get purified. So that gives a lot of hope actually that by being in this situation and hearing, we will be able to execute pure devotional service. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I like this point that you are describing the characteristics of the modes. Like when one is in ignorance, then he is intoxicated by illusion that he is in a state of madness. And when one is in passion, there is a constant hankering to fulfill something. And in goodness, there is a satisfaction. And that satisfaction is born from the fact that one realizes his existence. So it means the other two modes, like there is no realization of the existence as well. That point was very inspiring.
Nice point. Very nice. And one should experience for oneself how one is becoming free from the pinching of the modes. This is Prabhupada's own language that he uses, that the modes have this pinching. And by practicing Krishna consciousness, we should be able to observe for ourselves how we're becoming less and less affected by the pinching of the modes of material nature. You have to experience this for yourself. And if you're not, then be patient, continue practicing, or adjust your practice so that it is more contiguous and not interrupted by other kinds of interests in life. Because the The Bhagavatam says that in order to completely satisfy the self, devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted. And if we have unmotivated and an uninterrupted service to Krishna, we will feel this complete satisfaction without the need for anything else. Last points? Yes.
Just follow up for that question. I didn't understand the equal. Means seeing the every living entity as a soul is equal, or what is the, and what is the practical of seeing every living entity as equal? Okay, we see, but we don't treat equally. Okay, so okay, we'll see everybody equal.
What's the practical use of seeing everybody equally but not being able to treat them equally? Well, there is a way in which we do treat everyone equally on the spiritual platform, but we also recognize that they may have more or less facility to accept what we have to offer. For instance, as devotees, our business is to give Krishna consciousness to others. Of course, our first business is to take it for ourselves, because you can't give what you don't have. But Srimad Bhagavatam says that a person who is engaged in distributing Krishna consciousness has to discriminate between four entities. Ishvare tadadineshu balisheshu dusatsucha prema maitri kripopeksha ya karoti samadhyamaha. So this is the middle platform of devotional service. And in the middle platform, the person sees Krishna, or Ishvar, believes in Krishna and has love for Krishna. Adineshu means that he develops friendship with devotees. He understands the benefit of staying in connection with devotees, because just by doing that, one imbibes their qualities and begins to advance in devotional service. Appropriately associates with different kinds of devotees and makes friendships. And then he gives as much mercy as possible a Vrindavan. He gives as much mercy as possible to those who are innocent. So he recognizes the difference in quality between these different people. And then he sees Dvisatsu, he sees envious people also, those who are not open to Krishna consciousness. And for them, the Shastra says, upeksha, you should avoid them. So there's four entities that one should see as a middle-class devotee. And one should act appropriately towards them. It doesn't mean that you don't see that they're spiritual. It's just there's a practical application of the philosophy. If you try to give something to someone who doesn't want it, it can actually inflame their envy. And it can make it worse for them, right? Yeah. And therefore, again, there are two parts to our life. There are two levels we're working on. One is called paramartika, which means we see everyone equally on the spiritual platform. We understand that the ultimate goal of life is Krishna, but we have to work within the restrictions of the three modes of material nature that are provided for us in order to practically apply the philosophy and to give it to others. So these two platforms are necessary. Yes?
You made a comment about not being uninterrupted.
Yes.
Well, that's when I made that's when I made a transformation. When I decided not to blame my husband because we didn't get along, instead of me going, you deceived me, I started waking up and realizing that we couldn't be that close together. It was better that we were apart, so we should have been happier because we were freer and we were uninterrupted. But when we were together, we interrupted each other, even though we thought we wanted to be together. You see, I changed it all around because people were saying that my husband deceived me. And then I realized that, no, that's not how it was. We were deceiving each other. That's why we had to let go. Because we weren't responsible enough to stay together and not be uninterrupted. Yeah.
So if you were going to make this into a concise point in one sentence, what would you say, the principle?
What would I say?
Okay. That kind of goes in the category of practical application. I mean, there's social intercourse in this world, and we have to, although we have a philosophy which is impeccable, there's a way in which we have to administer it according to the situation that we're in. And there are scriptures that talk about how one should eat meat, for instance. And this is sometimes others who are in a higher mode of nature and who eschew meat eating, they might look at that and say, what is that? This sounds offensive even. But according to the bigger scheme of the Vedic literature, there are people who are in a lower mode of nature. They can't break out of it all at once. And therefore they're provided facility in which they can engage their propensity in a way that it gradually elevates them to a higher level. Therefore, we're advised to not critically look at other parts of the scripture that minister to people in a lower mode of nature. So this really points out the fact that there's practical application of the philosophy. One cannot simply jump to the highest level and say, I see everybody equally. And Prabhupada warns against this in the Sri Upanishad, in the verses that say, one who sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord and sees the Supreme Lord within everything, never hates anything or any being. One who sees all living entities as spiritual sparks in quality one with the Lord becomes a true knower of things. What then can be illusion or anxiety for him? And in the first sentences, Prabhupada says that don't imitate this. This is the level of the highest devotee. And you can't imitate it. A cheap imitation, it won't help you. In fact, in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna tells Uddhava that Sway adhikariyanishta saguna parikirtita, that it's a good quality when you accept the qualification you have now, the level you're at now, and you apply it appropriately, rather than trying to do something higher than you can. A text has come in. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Prabhash Prabhu from Sacramento.
Haribol Prabhash, Hare Krishna.
So he says, Hare Krishna Vaisesika Prabhu and all devotees. Wonderful preaching. Thank you Vaisesika Prabhu. It is so refreshing to hear something so fundamental. We think that we know all this, but when we hear it again and again, it sinks in. I can tell that out of my personal experience, that giving up my ears to only listening to Prabhupada about Sri Krishna has kept me alive in Krishna consciousness. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. And it's not like these things aren't available. If you want to hear all of Prabhupada's lectures from beginning to end, it's available. My good friend Keshava Bharati Maharaj, who lives in Vrindavan much of the time, has this practice that sequentially he listens to all of Prabhupada's lectures, beginning from the beginning, going all the way to the end. He has them all lined up. So, during the course of the year, he hears every one of the lectures, and then he starts over again. And there's a very powerful effect to that. You become fortified by hearing, this direct Krishna consciousness. And Prabhu's comment about talking about the basics or the fundamentals of Krishna consciousness, you're not your body and so forth. To one who's advancing in Krishna consciousness, these topics become more and more interesting. It's not that as one is elevated to a higher platform of devotional service, one then throws away the Bhagavad Gita and says, that's no longer interesting to me. I'm only interested in higher things. But actually, the more one's realizing that he or she is not the body and that all living entities are spiritual and so forth, the information becomes more and more fascinating. One more text?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is from a name I don't know. I've just pinged them for the name. So Prabhu says, in 1976, Washington, D.C. morning class, Srila Prabhupada was reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the conversation is between Sanatana Goswami and Lord Chaitanya. There are 4 problems in material existence: birth, death, old age, and disease. And then he stopped and edited his purport saying, no, actually there is only one problem, envy of Krishna. That's it.
Nice. Hare Krishna. Yes, Omkar.
I wanted to, if I may, say something about your question. As far as I understood his question, I think what you were trying to say was that if we see everyone on the same level but we don't treat them all on the same way, then what's the use of seeing them all as spiritual? And it reminded me of one benefit I've gotten at times, which is when I am aware that every living entity is a soul, and that the soul is equal in whatever circumstance it may be, then if I see, sometimes it happens, if I see an ant, I think, wow, the same thing that's animating my body is animating that body. And both myself and that soul in that ant body are struggling to fulfill our desires. And when I remember that there's a soul in the ant just like there's a soul in my body, then it's not that I hug the ant or treat the ant as if it were a human, but it does bring the awareness to me that I have so much facility in this body, and it brings some appreciation that we're in different circumstances, but we're the same inside. But let me take advantage of the circumstance I have now, whereas he probably can't.
Nice. Also, there's a way in which Haridas Thakur describes how the loud chanting of the holy names of God does good for all living entities. So when we go to Palo Alto, it's not just, the humans walking to chant Hare Krishna on the street. It's not just that human beings walking up and down get benefit, but Haridas Thakur said that even the inanimate living entities, like the trees and the grass, when they hear the vibration of the names of God, they get this powerful benefit. And what to speak of bugs flying through the air. And the Antya-lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is perhaps, the most esoteric writing we have about the science of Krishna consciousness, begins with a story of Shivananda Sain taking in a dog into a party of devotees that are traveling from Navadvip to Jagannath Puri. And Mahaprabhu, Shivananda Sain was in charge of the party, and he would take care of all the devotees. So when the dog ran into the party of devotees, he began to maintain it. He said, he's with us. And as they continued along, he told the cook in the party that every night he should make some boiled rice for the dog and make sure he was fed and taken care of just like everybody else. And then when they came to a boat crossing, and all the devotees were getting on the boat, and Shivananda Sain was the one to pay for the fare for all the devotees, then the dog started to get on. The boatman said, no dogs. And Shivananda gave him extra money, said, okay, let him on. And then Shivananda Sain had to go ahead of the party in order to arrange the accommodations for the devotees each night. So he came back from that one night and he said, where's the dog? And nobody could see where the dog was. And then he asked the cook, did you feed him his rice? And he said, no, I forgot. And Shivananda Sain became very upset. He was morose. And the rest of the party went on to Jagannath Puri feeling upset that the dog wasn't taken care of properly. When they arrived in Jagannath Puri, they went to the Jagannath temple, they did all their ritual ablutions, everything, and then next day they came to meet Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at his residence. And Mahaprabhu was sitting with the dog. And Mahaprabhu was taking some prasad, and he was throwing the remnants of that prasad. It was green coconut pulp. He was throwing it to the dog and telling the dog, chant Krishna. And Kaviraj Goswami said the dog was complying, he was chanting. And then Kaviraj Goswami says that dog went back to Godhead. So the practice of Krishna consciousness is for everybody. And there is a way in which it gets it gives benefit to all living entities, whether in a higher body or in a lower body. That's what Rupa Goswami describes in when he talks about pure devotional service. He says pure devotional service is the beginning of it removes all distress, and then he says it's all auspicious. And he said one aspect of auspiciousness is that it does good for all living entities, not just a select few, but everybody. Everyone gets some benefit from the propagation of Krishna consciousness. That's what auspiciousness means. So if you take to the life of a devotee, it's not that you'll lack anything, and it's not that you'll lack facility to give to every living entity. In fact, if you remain in the material conception of life, there's only so much you can give because you have a limited conception. You think, only these people. I mean, sometimes in an attempt to help others, which everyone does in their own way. And as I said last night, there are millions of good causes, but there's only one great cause. And you may actually harm people in trying to do good for them. Prabhupada gives the example that once in his neighborhood there was a family where a young boy in the family had cholera. And the parents had to run out for an emergency, so they told the older brother that you take care of your younger brother and make sure that he doesn't eat anything because it could kill him. And while the parents were out just for a few minutes, the young boy said, if I could just have one samosa. And the older brother thought, well, what's the harm? I mean, he wants it, and I could do good for him. So came and brought him a samosa, and the younger boy almost died. And the parents became very angry. So misapplied knowledge or limited knowledge or thinking one's doing good for others may actually do harm. Whereas if one has a broad vision of a Mahatma and understands the nature of all living entities, one can do the highest good. And thus, we've come to an end today of our discussion here on the first inaugural, that's redundant, on the inaugural Sunday feast here at ISKCON Silicon Valley. And we thank everyone who's joined us online today and those who have texted in. Thank you everyone who've come from all over the Bay Area to join us.
Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.